Thank you for joining Environment and Climate Change Canada's Low Carbon Economy Challenge webinar. Our objective is to provide you with an overview of the Low Carbon Economy Fund, and specifically, the Low Carbon Economy Challenge component. We will discuss here program requirements, application guidance, and the application process. We will also go over key dates, including application deadlines, review periods, and when the funding is expected to be allocated. What is the Low Carbon Economy Challenge, and how can it provide a benefit for you and your community? For more information on the Low Carbon Economy Fund, visit the link below. On this site, you will find an overview of the fund and everything you need to know to apply, including the applicant guide, frequently asked questions, and the application form. The website is periodically updated with additional information to respond to applicant questions and provide more information on key dates. The Low Carbon Economy Fund, or LCEF, was first announced in the Government of Canada's 2016 budget. It is valued at nearly $2 billion over 5 years. The objective of the LCEF is to help Canadians reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. It is a key element of Canada's plan to achieve its national target of reducing GHG emissions to 30% below 2005 levels by the year 2030. This is Canada's commitment to the international community under the Paris Agreement, signed in 2015. The program is also designed to support Canada's transition to a low-carbon economy while generating clean growth and creating new jobs for Canadians. There are two components to the LCEF. The first is the Low Carbon Economy Leadership Fund, also called the Leadership Fund. It was launched in June 2017 and allocates approximately $1.4 billion to provinces and territories who have adopted the Pan-Canadian Framework on Clean Growth and Climate Change. Each province and territory is eligible to receive a share of the Leadership Fund based on their population. Provinces and territories can use this funding to support new or expanded programs designed to meet their specific needs in a way that will reduce greenhouse gas emissions, reduce energy usage, and contribute to job creation. The second component of the LCEF is the Challenge Fund, which was announced by the Minister of Environment and Climate Change Canada in Vancouver on March 14, 2018. Over $500 million will be available to Canadians as part of the challenge. The challenge will support projects submitted by all provinces and territories, as well as municipalities, Indigenous communities and organizations, businesses, and not-for-profit organizations. Funded projects will leverage Canadian ingenuity across the country to reduce emissions and generate clean growth in support of the Pan-Canadian Framework on Clean Growth and Climate Change. The over $500 million of the Challenge Fund will be used to support projects that directly reduce GHG emissions while supporting clean growth and job creation for Canadians. There are 4 key principles that must be respected as part of the challenge. The first key principle is materiality. Projects funded through the challenge need to support material GHG emission reductions. This means that any reductions achieved through the challenge will need to be clearly measured, tracked, and reported. These reductions will also need to be verifiable. The second principle is incrementality. Funding provided through the challenge needs to support new activities or expand existing ones in a way that contributes to reducing incremental GHG emissions, above and beyond the impact of existing regulations or policies. Projects also need to be incremental to your current plans. In other words, the challenge can't fund a project that is already going forward. Funding from the challenge cannot be used to replace funding from other sources, such as provincial, territorial, or municipal governments, which has already been committed to the project. You can find more detailed information concerning incrementality in the applicant guide in sections 4.5 and 5.6. The third principle is that activities funded through the challenge must contribute towards helping Canada meet or exceed its national target of reducing GHG emissions to 30% below 2005 levels by 2030. While the total impact of a project over its lifespan will be considered as part of the evaluation process, it is essential that projects also contribute to reducing GHG emissions in the year 2030. The final key principle is cost effectiveness. Funding distributed through the challenge will go towards projects that are as cost-effective as possible. This means that projects will be selected in part based on the results they can achieve, specifically GHG emission reductions per dollar of program funding. This approach will help ensure that a significant number of tons of GHG emissions are reduced through projects that receive funding from the challenge. Note that throughout this presentation, I will refer to potential projects under the challenge. This can refer to a single project in a single location, for example, a major retrofit of a single industrial facility. However, it can also mean a portfolio of projects. For example, multiple energy efficiency retrofits in different buildings at different locations brought together as a single proposal for the challenge. Within the challenge, there will be 2 streams. These streams have shared objectives but are open to different potential applicants. The Champions stream is valued at over $450 million and is open to a wider range of eligible recipients. All provinces and territories can apply to the Champions stream, as well as municipalities, businesses, not-for-profit organizations, and Indigenous communities and organizations. Environment and Climate Change Canada has been accepting applications for funding through the Champions intake since March 14th. The deadline for submitting expressions of interest is midnight, Pacific Standard Time, on May 14th, 2018. The Partnerships stream is a smaller component of the challenge, valued at $50 million. Eligibility for the Partnerships stream has been limited to a smaller group of eligible recipients to ensure that the challenge is inclusive of a wide group of Canadians. Indigenous communities and organizations, small and medium-sized businesses, those with less than 500 employees, small municipalities with populations of less than 100,000, and not-for-profit organizations are eligible to apply for funding through the Partnerships stream. All applicants who are eligible for the Partnerships stream are also eligible for the Champions stream. Application for funding through the Partnerships stream will open in the coming months, and final applications will be due later in 2018. Applicants who are eligible for both streams are encouraged to submit their project to both the Champions and Partnerships stream to take full advantage of all opportunities to seek financial support. Each stream has different limits concerning how much funding is available to applicants. The minimum LCEF contribution for both streams is $1 million. This minimum funding level helps focus funding on projects that are sufficiently large to have a significant impact on overall GHG emission reductions. The maximum LCEF contribution differs for the 2 streams, due in large part to the difference in total funding available for each. An LCEF contribution of up to $50 million can be made by Environment and Climate Change Canada towards a single project through the Champions stream, while the maximum LCEF contribution towards a project through the Partnership stream is $10 million. Provinces and territories are only eligible to apply through the Champions stream. The maximum funding allocation for provinces is 50% of the total eligible costs associated with the proposed project, while territories can receive up to 75%. All municipalities are eligible for LCEF funding of up to 40% of total project costs and are eligible to apply to the Champions stream. However, only municipalities with populations of less than 100,000 are eligible to apply to the Partnerships stream. Indigenous communities and organizations are eligible for funding of up to 75% and are eligible to apply to both the Champions and Partnerships streams. Of note, for-profit businesses owned by Indigenous communities or organizations are only eligible for the lower allocation available to businesses. All businesses are eligible for LCEF contributions of up to 25% of total project costs and can apply to the Champions stream. Only businesses with less than 500 employees are eligible to participate in the Partnerships stream. In the case of non-for-profit organizations, they are eligible to participate in both the Champions and Partnerships streams and eligible to receive LCEF contributions valued at up to 40% of the total project costs. Where appropriate, a lead applicant can partner with other eligible recipients to submit joint proposals under the challenge. For example, a joint project might make sense because of the opportunity to share costs, leverage the capacity of different applicants, and/or to take advantage of economies of scale created by a larger project. In this situation, a lead applicant must be identified for the purposes of applying and signing the funding agreement and serving as the primary contact for the Government of Canada during implementation of the project. If applicants in a joint proposal are eligible for different maximum levels of funding support, the maximum amount of funding available to the project will be calculated proportionally based on the eligible expenses of each type of applicant. Section 4.4 of the Applicant Guide provides more detail. It should be noted that a joint proposal with a lead applicant and partner applicants is different from a proposal submitted by a group of organizations forming a single legal entity. In this case, the single entity created for the purpose of applying would be the applicant. It is also worth noting that applicants do not have to request the maximum amount of funding available for their project. Project applications will be more competitive when the applicant covers a significant portion of the total project cost, since proposals will be assessed on the basis of the results achieved per dollar of LCEF contribution. The challenge supports GHG mitigation projects in a number of sectors. The list of eligible sectors displayed on the screen is not exhaustive, but it is meant to give you an idea of the sectors in which an applicant could seek funding. If your project is not from a sector on this list, you can still apply to the challenge, and it will be considered on a case-by-case basis. Eligible sectors and project types include the following: building energy efficiency and fuel switching, residential and commercial retrofits, including fuel switching, social housing retrofits, including fuel switching, municipal building retrofits, including fuel switching, government building retrofits, including fuel switching, universities, schools, and hospital retrofits, including fuel switching. Industrial, energy efficiency, fuel switching, process changes. Forestry, enhancing carbon sinks in the forestry sector, for example, afforestation, reforestation, changes to forest management, and reducing GHG emissions in the forestry sector. Agriculture, enhancing carbon sinks in the agriculture sector, reducing GHG emissions in the agriculture sector. Waste sector, methane capture, organics diversion. Transportation, heavy-duty vehicle retrofits, including energy efficiency and/or fuel switching. Marine vehicle retrofits, including energy efficiency and/or fuel switching. Rail retrofits, including energy efficiency and/or fuel switching. Low emissions fuel production, renewable natural gas production for own use, liquid renewable fuel production for own use, other low carbon fuel production for own use, electricity and/or energy production, district heating systems, combined heat and power for own use, renewable energy systems, for example, solar photovoltaic, solar hot water systems, wind, microhydro for own use. Some sectors are ineligible for the challenge, such as new construction of buildings, new vehicles, vehicle fueling or charging infrastructure, or transit and active transit infrastructure, energy transmission and fuel transportation infrastructure, and energy production for sale on the market. Sectors are ineligible due to a combination of one or more factors, such as the availability of other federal funding programs that target the sector, difficulties in attributing GHG emission reductions to a specific project in that sector, and/or difficulty ensuring that LCEF funding will not go to profit-generating activities. Eligible activities considered for funding under the challenge must consist of specific projects or portfolio of identified projects, make use of commercially available technology, and result in measurable domestic GHG emission reductions that help Canada meet its 2030 GHG emission reduction target. As such, research activities or more general projects, such as those aiming to build capacity or educate Canadians, will not be considered for funding through the Low Carbon Economy Fund. Specifically, in order to be eligible for funding, projects must meet the following key requirements. The project must make use of commercially available technologies. The challenge will only fund projects using technologies at the Technology Readiness Level, TRL, Scale 8 or above. This means technologies that have already gone through the demonstration phase and have been proven to work in their final form in expected conditions. In order to minimize uncertainty, as well as avoiding overlap with other federal funding programs, the challenge will not support projects that make use of technologies that are still being developed or are at the demonstration phase. The project must result in measurable GHG emission reductions towards Canada's 2030 target. The challenge will fund projects that reduce GHG emissions in Canada. project assessment will consider both cumulative GHG reductions caused by the project and annual emissions reductions in 2030. GHG emissions reductions that take place outside of Canada, such as those stemming from the use of products or technologies exported to other countries, will not be considered. The project or portfolio of projects must be identified before the formal proposal is submitted. The challenge will only fund projects where activities, investments, and locations have been confirmed. Incentive programs and/or projects yet to be selected via a call for proposals or an application-based process are not eligible for funding. Applicants can put forward potential activities at the expression of interest stage without having confirmed all details. However, the formal proposal must provide confirmed project details. The following types of activities are not eligible for LCEF funding. The project cannot include research, development, and demonstration, RD&D elements. Projects with RD&D activities are not eligible for funding under the challenge. Any RD&D activities aimed at demonstrating the effectiveness of a product or technology used as part of the project must be concluded prior to the formal proposal. Any concurrent RD&D activities must be excluded from the project scope and costs, and project results, for example, GHG emissions reductions, cannot be dependent on these activities. The project cannot include standalone educational or capacity building elements. In order to focus on activities that result in direct GHG emissions reductions, the challenge will not fund general, standalone educational, or capacity building projects. However, it should be noted that technical staff or end-user training directly related to the implementation of the project is not considered a standalone element. The project cannot include a standalone feasibility study or other prospective studies. Standalone feasibility or engineering studies are not eligible for funding under the challenge and cannot be included as an element of the proposed project. The project cannot be dependent on any preliminary studies aimed at informing the decision of whether or not to go forward with the initiative. Such studies must be completed before the formal proposal is submitted. The project cannot include the construction of new buildings. The challenge will not fund projects for which GHG emissions reductions are achieved based on the construction of new buildings, for example, reductions stemming from the building beyond code or via carbon sinks in wood buildings. However, new buildings which are necessary as part of projects that aim to reduce GHG emissions through other methods, for example, municipal waste, energy efficiency, and industrial processes, are acceptable. The project cannot include endowments, revolving funds, financing, loans, and loan guarantees. The challenge will only reimburse eligible expenses incurred for a specific project. The LCEF is a contribution program as opposed to a grant program. This means that federal contributions towards projects will be provided after the project proponent has incurred costs and submitted receipts to Environment and Climate Change Canada. Once receipts are provided, ECCC will issue payments to proponents. However, Environment and Climate Change Canada will only make payments to project proponents for expenses that are considered to be direct and necessary for the successful implementation of the project. These expenses can include, but are not limited to, staff salaries and benefits paid to staff for incremental work directly related to the project where the recipient can demonstrate value for money, management and professional service costs, such as accounting, communications, official languages translation, audit charges, GHG emission reductions, and energy savings estimate verification, and results monitoring, measuring, and reporting, material and supplies costs, equipment and capital assets purchase or rental, vehicle rental and operation costs, contractors required to perform activities related to the project, any GST or HST that is not reimbursable by Canada Revenue Agency, and any PST not reimbursable by the provinces, and other costs necessary to support the purpose of the funding as approved by the Minister. Additionally, payments will only be made to reimburse costs that were incurred after a funding agreement was signed and up to the end of the program on March 31st, 2022. Next, let's move along and consider the methodological guidance for the challenge. As part of the expression of interest due by May 14th, we are asking applicants to provide estimates of the GHG emission reductions expected to be achieved through your proposed project. We recognize that some applicants may not have enough time or resources to prepare a full GHG assessment for the initial expression or interest application, and there might be a learning curve for proponents that have not previously implemented a climate mitigation project. For the expression of interest, estimates of emission reductions can be calculated using basic assumptions, but proponents need to follow the key steps of a GHG assessment. Once expression of interest applications are screened and applicants are invited to submit formal applications at the first proposal stage, applicants will need to provide estimates that are based on a detailed GHG assessment. ECCC will provide more detailed methodological guidance and templates at the formal proposal stage. At both the expression of interest and the formal proposal stage, applicants will need to provide estimates of the project emission reductions in 2030 and over the full lifetime of the proposed project. While this presentation provides a brief overview, more detailed methodological guidance can be found on the Challenge website and in the applicant guide. In this guide, you will find that methodological guidance has been developed using two internationally recognized standards for GHG accounting. These are ISO Standard 14064-2, 2006, Specification for GHG Quantification, Monitoring, and Reporting at the Project Level, and GHG Protocol for Project Accounting, World Resources Institute. Note that the GHG Protocol is available as a free download online, along with other useful resources for estimating GHG emissions reductions. In all GHG assessments, applicants are required to estimate the GHG impact of their proposal. You must quantify the baseline scenario and the project scenario. The difference between these two scenarios is the estimated level of GHG emission reductions. The baseline is representative of the conditions most likely to occur in the absence of the proposed project. Quantifying the baseline will depend on the type of project and needs to be based on a representative projection of the conditions most likely to occur in the absence of the project. The project scenario represents the conditions most likely to occur in the presence of the project being proposed. The estimated GHG reductions of the project are the difference between the baseline and project scenarios. There is a four-step process to estimate reductions. The first step in the GHG assessment is to define the assessment boundary. The description of the GHG assessment boundary should include the type of activity or activities in the proposed project, for example, reduced energy use, fuel switching, manure management, forest establishment, the GHGs affected per activity, for example, carbon dioxide, CO2, methane, CH4, nitrous oxide, N2O, GHG sources and sinks affected by the activity, the geographic region in which emissions reductions will occur. The second step of the GHG assessment will be to establish a GHG baseline. The baseline scenario should be representative of the conditions most likely to occur in the absence of the proposed project. The baseline must be based on conservative assumptions. The third step of the GHG assessment will be to estimate a GHG project scenario. Applicants should calculate the estimated GHG emissions based on the assessment boundary and time period according to the guidance above. While the cumulative GHG emissions will be calculated over the lifetime, the annual emission reductions in 2030 will also be required in the application. The fourth step of the GHG assessment is the calculation of expected GHG reductions from the project. This is the difference between the baseline and project scenarios and should represent net emission reductions. If this is a project to enhance carbon sinks, for example forestry, the results will be increased removals. The result should be a net reduction of emissions relative to the baseline emissions. At the formal proposal stage, estimates will need to be provided for every year starting with the baseline year to the year 2030, as well as total reductions over the full project lifetime. The results we need to see in your expression of interest are the GHG reductions in the year 2030 and the total over the full project lifetime. By project lifetime, we mean the period over which the project will generate emission reductions as compared to the baseline scenario. Now, continuing with the next component of the presentation, let's consider the application process. The process of applying for funding through the Low Carbon Economy Challenge has two parts. First, there is an expression of interest and then a formal proposal. The first thing for a potential applicant to do is to visit the LCEF website and review the applicant guide. The applicant guide will include most of the information covered in this presentation, along with more specific material that will help provide more detailed guidance. After reviewing the applicant guide, the applicant will then be able to prepare an expression of interest and submit it to Environment and Climate Change Canada using the online application tool. The expression of interest is basically an initial high-level application to seek funding through the challenge. It will be reviewed by ECCC officials to screen projects for eligibility based on the program parameters. Projects may also be screened out due to concerns around cost effectiveness. For example, very high program costs per ton of GHG emissions reductions achieved, and/or significant concerns about project feasibility and risk. Applicants who make it through this initial screening will be invited to continue on with the application process and submit a formal proposal. The formal proposal will require more detailed information, and additional methodological guidance will be provided. After reviewing the guidance, the applicant should prepare and submit their final proposal using the online application tool. Environment and Climate Change Canada will undertake a complete review and assessment of each formal proposal, including project work plan, costing, and projected GHG emissions reductions. The best proposals will be recommended for funding to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change, who will make final decisions on funding proposals. Successful applicants will be notified and invited to sign funding agreements with the Government of Canada. While the potential for GHG emission reductions will be considered at the expressions of interest stage, it is designed to be used to obtain preliminary information on proposed projects, and this phase will be used to screen projects for eligibility based on program parameters. More detailed information concerning the specific impacts of a proposed project will be assessed at the final proposal phase. The key requirement of projects funded through the challenge is that they contribute to reducing GHG emissions in 2030. The process of assessing which projects will receive funding will focus primarily on the amount of GHG emissions reductions driven by a project, taking into consideration the requested LCEF contribution towards the project, with a primary focus on annual emission reductions in 2030 and a secondary focus on lifetime emission reductions expected from the projects. Additional considerations will be given to co-benefits of the project, for example, contributing to Canada's environmental, economic, and social goals, as well as project feasibility and risk. Additional factors may also be considered, and the final decisions concerning which projects will be funded will fall within the discretion of the Minister of Environment and Climate Change, in consultation with Cabinet. Once a formal proposal has been assessed and selected, Environment and Climate Change Canada will inform the applicant and provide information on funding levels and next steps. Federal contributions to approved projects will be contingent on the signing of a funding agreement between the Government of Canada and the recipient within 30 business days of project approval, and the agreement will outline the terms and conditions under which federal funding will be provided. Applicants whose proposed projects are not selected for funding, either at the expression of interest or the formal proposal stages, will receive an email notification. All decisions are final and are not subject to review. Moving along, let's discuss the key dates and service standards for the challenge. The challenge was launched on March 14, 2018. A submission deadline has already been established, and all expressions of interest for the champion stream must be submitted by May 14th. Federal officials will review the champion stream expression of interests as quickly as possible and invite applicants who are screened at this stage to submit formal proposals. Exact deadlines for formal proposals will be provided at that stage. Eventually, final funding decisions will be made in fall 2018 and winter 2019, and then funding agreements can be signed. The application process for the partnership stream will be launched later this year, with an expectation that final funding decisions will be made by early 2019. The LCEF program will continue until March 31st, 2022, the deadline for incurring any eligible expenses under the program. The Government of Canada respects the effort that goes into submitting funding applications and understands the importance of keeping applicants informed, and has established the following service standards. Applicants will receive an email informing them that their application has been received within 5 business days of receipt of the application. Subsequently, within 30 business days of the deadline for submitting an expression of interest, applicants will be informed of whether or not they will be invited to continue with the process and submit a formal application. Applicants will be informed of final funding decisions within 10 business days of the decision being made. For additional information, or to submit an expression of interest, you can visit the Challenge website. Specific questions concerning the challenge can be sent to the email address on the screen. Thank you very much.